Why was everyone staring at her rifle instead of the target? The desert heat pressed down like a living thing, dry, relentless, metallic in the lungs. Midday shimmer made the air bend and dance, blurring the edges of Fort Granite's long, dust-beaten firing range. Each bootstep kicked up another puff of powder that hung suspended, as if even the wind didn't want to touch it. They'd all been laughing a few minutes ago, snipers, Marines, Rangers, instructors, the usual range day mix of banter and bravado. Then she opened her rifle case. The laughter didn't stop immediately, it just changed shape. A long, clean case unzipped, and a deep crimson rifle emerged, matte-finished but unmistakable against the sea of tan and black steel. The sunlight caught it just right, and for a heartbeat, the red glowed like a spark in dry grass. The air stilled. Someone near the benches exhaled a scoff. "Who paints a rifle red?" Another voice, low and amused, joined in. "Guess supplies feeling festive." And then came the voice that cut through the murmurs, older, steady, tinged with mock authority. "Colonel Rohr." He tilted his head, lips curling into that half-smirk of someone who already knew the punchline. "We painting rifles for the 4th now, Sergeant." A few chuckles followed, polite but pointed, the kind meant to draw lines us and her. Staff Sergeant Nora Blake didn't rise to it. Didn't flinch, didn't even glance up. She just ran her hand down the rifle's body, checking each screw, each line of torque, every fraction of steel alignment that mattered to her and no one else. "Wind full value 8 to 12, gusting from 3 o'clock, she murmured softly, almost like she was talking to the air instead of herself. Rohr folded his arms, still smirking. "You're not actually planning to shoot that thing at the 3,800-meter plate, are you?" Someone snorted. Another lifted a phone, already recording. But Nora only tightened the sling around her shoulder and adjusted her scope, every motion quiet, deliberate, patient, the kind of patience that comes from doing things right when nobody's watching. The red rifle caught the light again, a bright defiance against the dust. "Copy that, sir," she said simply. And that was it. No comeback, no ego, just a voice steady enough to make silence sound heavier than laughter. She didn't look like someone who turned heads. 5'6", lean, with calm eyes the color of wet steel. Her uniform sleeves were rolled tight, no loose threads, no wasted lines. Everything about her was measured, from the way she breathed to the way she blinked. The others looked at her and saw supply. That word alone carried weight on a range like this, not respect, not ridicule exactly, just dismissal. The supply sergeant counts rounds, she doesn't send them down range. But Nora had never needed permission to belong. She grew up in a place where belonging was built, not given. Western Kentucky, where the air always smelled like a mix of machine oil and hay. Her father's shop was her first classroom, metal tools, sawdust, and the hum of patience. "Metal remembers mistakes," he'd say, guiding her hand along the milling table. "You only cut once, so make it count." She never forgot that. Precision was respect. Years later, when she joined the army, that quiet discipline made her stand out. Not because she was loud, but because she never had to be. During training, she filled notebooks with numbers, wind brackets, drift corrections, equations that looked more like poetry than math to anyone else. One line in particular lived like a creed across every page. "Numbers first, ego last." That line had kept her steady through every change, every reassignment, every room where she was underestimated. Now standing under the desert sun, she watched those same lessons fold neatly back into her breathing, slow, steady, exact. They could mock her rifle all they wanted. Steel and math didn't laugh back. By mid-morning, she'd already become the quiet rumor of the range. Someone whispered, "She's supply right." Another said, "Custom toy, probably never fired it." Nora heard it all, though she never let a flicker of it show. When a young private fumbled his bipod latch, she crouched beside him, no lecture, no words, adjusted the spring tension with her multi-tool, then simply said, "Try it now." Click, solid lock. He smiled, embarrassed. She nodded once and went back to her notes. The desert wind kept shifting, arguing with itself. Mirage boiled heavy at mid-range. Most shooters hated it. To Nora, it was conversation. "Wind's a moving language," she told the same private during break. "You listen more than you speak." He didn't get it yet, but he remembered the tone, calm, assured, like she wasn't explaining something new, just reminding the world of what it used to know. When the range instructor offered her the 800-meter warm-up target, she shook her head. Her gaze never left the far berm, the one that shimmered like a mirage almost 4 kilometers away. "That's the one I came for," she said. No arrogance, just fact. The men around her laughed softly, the kind of laugh that hides discomfort. She didn't react. By noon she'd earned a nickname, Supply Red. Half joke, half insult. But not one she minded. She'd been called worse by better. Colonel Rohr noticed the whispers too. He enjoyed them more than he admitted. To him, the range was part competition, part theater. Confidence was his oxygen, and Nora's silence unsettled him. "Put Sergeant Blake last," he told the ranger master. "Don't want to hold up the line." That earned a few grins. Everyone knew what last meant. Let the quiet one fail after everyone's had their turn. That way, the jokes land cleaner. Nora just nodded, made a note in her book. Window, mid-afternoon, 7-second lull between gusts. Her pencil moved like her pulse, steady, unfazed. When she rolled up her sleeve to wipe the sweat from her wrist, someone noticed the ink. A dragonfly, black wings, tiny numbers along its body. Coordinates, maybe. She covered it as soon as she realized eyes were on her. No one asked. But they remembered. The first shots cracked across the range, a chorus of controlled explosions. Veterans with sand-worn rifles, men whose confidence filled the air like static. Dust bloomed at 2,500 meters, misses both. One shooter cursed under his breath. Wind ate it. Nora, behind her notebook, wrote quietly. Crossshear 1820, correction, +02 mil left drift. Every detail mattered, every gust had shape. The laughter faded now, the misses made things real. Colonel Rohr checked his watch, irritation edging his tone. "Cut the extras, 2-siders before score, keep it fair." 2-siders at 3,800 meters. A setup, not a rule. Nora said nothing. She flipped a clean page, penciled. 2-siders adjust on time of flight. Wind hold count 5, no second guess. The range quieted again, not peaceful quiet, but the kind heavy with waiting. When her name finally came over the loudspeaker, Staff Sergeant Nora Blake, Lane 9, the air thinned. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. She stepped forward. The red rifle gleamed under the sun like a forbidden thing. The Marine gunny who'd mocked her earlier muttered, "That's a long way for a parade piece." She heard him, didn't care. Rohr adjusted his sunglasses, voice loud enough for everyone. "All right, Sergeant, let's see what supply can do." Nora settled prone, checked her bubble level, adjusted for spin, drift, Coriolis, density, altitude, the invisible math of bullets and wind. Her hand brushed the trigger guard once, not to fire, but to feel the rifle breathe with her. The line went silent. Every soldier, every instructor, every skeptic felt it, that strange shift in the air when focus becomes sacred. She was no longer just Supply Red. She was something they didn't have a name for yet. Her lips moved, counting under her breath. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Somewhere in that rhythm, the desert itself seemed to pause, as if the earth knew the sound of truth being measured. Rohr tilted his head. The smirk faltered. For the first time he realized she wasn't performing. She was listening. Listening to a world he couldn't hear. Across the valley, the steel plate shimmered like a mirage at the edge of existence. And for the briefest heartbeat, everyone forgot the jokes. The colonel, the Marines, the instructors, all of them stood in the stillness of her patience. Even the private she'd helped earlier whispered, almost reverent, "She's timing the wind." The faint click of her safety broke the silence like a single piano key in an empty room. Then, still prone behind her red rifle, Nora exhaled slowly, one clean line of breath that carried her entire history in it. She wasn't shooting for applause. She wasn't proving them wrong. She was doing what she'd always done. Listening, calculating, trusting the math. And somewhere inside that calm, the wind shifted briefly, perfectly, like it was answering her. The countdown hit 7. Her finger found the trigger. And the desert, for just one moment, forgot how to move. The shot broke like a heartbeat. Not loud, not cinematic thunder, just a clean, precise sound that folded into the wind and disappeared. The recoil rolled straight back into her shoulder, unhurried, disciplined. Brass spun once in the air, kissed the mat, and lay still. Then nothing. Time stretched thin across the valley. Everyone waited for the sound, that faint metallic ring that meant impact, but it didn't come. Only the whistle of air and the faraway shimmer of heat. 7 seconds. 8. 9. And then the faintest sigh of dust, short of the plate. Someone whispered, "Missed." Nora didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. She marked her page, neat handwriting, small corrections. S1 short low left. Mirage Boyle mid worse than flags. Wind lying. She circled a note. Boyle seam pulls down and right. No frustration, just data. To her, a miss was a sentence misread. You didn't argue with it, you learned its grammar. The colonel exhaled, half-smile returning. "Nice try, Sergeant." Nora's pencil paused mid-note. "Tracking, sir." She said it softly, but the tone wasn't submission. It was translation. "I'm not done speaking yet." The colonel folded his arms again, but his smirk had changed shape, less mockery now, more defense. Behind him, Master Chief Harlow, the visiting SEAL instructor, kept his gaze locked on Nora. He'd been quiet all morning, the kind of man who didn't waste words unless they built something. And what he saw now wasn't luck or arrogance. It was muscle memory written in calm. He leaned toward the colonel. "She's not adjusting like a student," he said quietly. "What's that supposed to mean?" "She's adjusting like she wrote the damn manual." Roar frowned, glancing back toward the line. Nora was already setting her second sighter. The heat bent the horizon. Mirage boiled off the sand in strange, liquid ribbons. The far plate was barely visible now, a ghost in a field of moving glass. Nora pressed her cheek to the stock again. Her heartbeat steadied to the rhythm she'd learned years ago in another country, another range, another life no one here knew existed. 7 beats, count the wind between them. She exhaled, the air between breaths shimmered. Her lips moved, too quietly for anyone but the desert to hear. 1, 2, 3. The flags to her right snapped left, then froze. 4, 5. A low vent near the ridge whispered the wrong direction. False friend. She waited one heartbeat longer. 6. The mirage softened like a curtain lifting. 7. The second shot broke, clean, precise, inevitable. Recoil straight, brass spun. The smell of carbon and sand merged into one breath of heat. This time, when the bullet crossed the valley, it caught a crosswind Nora had already marked half an hour ago. The shot drifted right by a hand's width, close enough to make every throat tighten. The dust bloomed just beside the plate. Someone cursed quietly, another shook his head. 2 siders, the colonel said, forcing authority into his tone. "We move on." Nora looked up from her notebook. Her eyes gray, calm, unreadable, found him briefly. "With respect, sir," she said, "I'm not chasing wind, I'm mapping it." The colonel opened his mouth, then shut it. Even the range officers paused. There was something about her composure that made argument feel childish. Harlow, still watching, murmured to himself, "She's building a pattern." The line shifted as the next shooters took position. Boots scuffed, brass clinked, voices rose and fell. But something about the air had changed, like the ground itself remembered that silence a moment too long. The Marine gunny who'd laughed earlier found his gum had lost its flavor. He chewed slower now, watching her. Beside him, a young ranger whispered, "What's she doing?" 2 shots, both off. Harlow answered without looking away. "She's learning the range. You're learning to watch her." Nora wasn't just observing wind, she was listening to it breathe. The boil, the sway of grass, the flutter of flags, they weren't distractions. They were syllables in a long conversation. When a British corporal 2 lanes down muttered that his shots kept drifting left, Nora spoke without lifting her head. "Split your holds. Mid-range is lying to you. Half at the break, float the rest by count 5. He hesitated, then tried it. His next shot hit steel with a faint, satisfying clang. He froze, blinking. "Bloody hell," he muttered. And just like that, the line turned its eyes toward her again. By late afternoon, the desert had become an oven of light. Every surface shimmered. The mirage boiled high enough to swallow shadows. Nora's sleeve slipped as she wiped her wrist again, and the dragonfly tattoo flashed in the light. Tiny black wings, delicate, inked with coordinates. Harlow saw them, his breath caught. He'd seen that mark before, not on her, but in a slide deck, years ago, briefing room outside Asadabad. A woman kneeling beside a damaged M11 rifle, dust and blood and light cutting through a mountain valley. Coordinates printed underneath. Ridge to Village Wind Clinic, Kunar Province, 2013. It couldn't be coincidence. He stepped closer. "Sergeant," he said quietly, "that tattoo, did you run Kunar Ridge in 2013? Roar turned, half laughing. "What is this, a campfire story?" But Harlow didn't blink. He watched her face. For the first time that day, Nora hesitated, just a flicker, a breath. Then her eyes lowered. "Wind doesn't care about years, Chief," she said. "It only changes direction." That was her way of saying yes. The silence that followed felt older than the mountains. Harlow nodded once, almost reverently. "Copy that." Roar looked between them, confused, but the others sensed something deeper. The line of shooters, men who doubted her, laughed at her, recorded her, now found themselves quiet, waiting. They didn't know who she was, but they were starting to understand what she was. When the tower called, "Next rotation, lanes clear," Nora didn't move immediately. She stayed prone, pencil steady over her notes. Her hand trembled slightly, not from nerves, from memory. The wind across this desert smelled faintly of metal, but in her head, it carried the scent of old smoke, Afghan clay and loss. Back then, she'd learned to read wind because lives depended on it. Every shot wasn't about hitting steel, it was about pulling someone out of the fire. And some days like this one, the air still spoke in the same tone. She closed her eyes. 2-siders, then truth. The colonel's voice cut through the intercom. "Sergeant Blake, you're still last in rotation." "Yes, sir." Her reply was simple, steady. But inside, her heart whispered something else. "You never stop being last when people only see your title." She checked the bolt, ran her hand along the stock. The red finish had absorbed the heat, warm against her palm, living proof of patience under pressure. The young private she'd helped earlier stepped closer, hesitating. "Sergeant." "Go ahead." Why help him, the Brit? He laughed like the others. She looked up at him, eyes soft. "Because wind doesn't care who deserves the hit. It only rewards who listens." He nodded slowly, the words sinking deeper than any correction about trigger control ever could. As the sun began to dip, the range looked different, less hostile, more human. The laughter that once filled it had burned away, replaced by something quieter. Respect wasn't applause, it was silence. The Marine gunny shuffled over, pretending to check his rifle. His eyes drifted to the red weapon on her mat. "You snake after every string?" he asked. "When the air changes," she replied. He nodded, pretending not to understand, but he did. Harlow caught the exchange, smiled faintly. "She's teaching without teaching." Roar finally broke the quiet. "All right," he said, louder than necessary. "Back to the sequence. Sergeant Blake, you're still last. Make your 2 count." "Yes, sir," she said again. And just like that, the range fell into her rhythm once more. The rhythm of breath, patience, and math written in motion. The evening wind rolled over the valley, soft, uncertain, carrying the scent of cooling dust. Nora leaned back from the scope for a moment, rubbing her trigger finger. A thin, white scar ran along its length, too straight for accident, too narrow for vanity. Old shooters recognized it. The mark of repetition, dry fire, heat, time, a scar carved by craft, not pain. Harlow saw it and knew for sure. He whispered to himself, "She's the ghost who wrote the cards." The cards, those laminated doctrine sheets about wind segmentation and timing, had circulated through sniper schools for years. Nobody knew their author, until now. He looked at her red rifle, the dragonfly, the scar. The math aligned. The colonel still didn't see it, but he would. Nora set her cheek against the stock once more, letting the world shrink to a circle of glass and a heartbeat. Somewhere far ahead, the 3,800-meter plate waited, a sliver of light at the edge of reality. The wind argued with itself, flags twitching left and right like two politicians refusing the same truth. She smiled faintly. "Wind's not the enemy," she murmured. "It's just a language that hates being rushed." The young private heard her, almost whispered back, "Then what are you saying to it?" Her eyes never left the target. "I'm asking it to listen." The colonel's voice cut through the speakers again. "Sergeant Blake on deck." "Copy," she said. Her fingers tightened around the rifle. And as the sun dropped lower, the air began to cool, the kind of air that makes mirage fade, the kind that carries sound for miles, the kind of air that keeps promises. She counted softly, under her breath again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And when she reached that final number, the desert seemed to lean closer, waiting. Because everyone, even the wind, knew what came next. The countdown hit 7. And then silence. No one spoke. No one dared. Even the flag seemed to hesitate in the wind, unsure whether to bow or resist. Nora's cheek pressed into the stock like a vow. The red rifle gleamed against her skin, not glossy now but alive, burnished with sunlight and dust. She inhaled once deep, centered, then let it go. Every number she'd written, every whisper of air, every insult swallowed with patience, all of it narrowed to a single heartbeat. This one. Her finger brushed the trigger, and the desert exhaled with her. The rifle cracked once, clean and honest. The sound wasn't dramatic, it was precise. A small, contained thunder that rolled out over 4 kilometers of heat and dust, crossing every layer of shimmer that had mocked her all day. Brass arced through sunlight, caught the light like gold, and dropped softly onto sand. The range fell still. The bullet was gone long before anyone breathed again. It traveled past the flags that lied, past the mirage that blurred truth, through air that bent and twisted and tried to hide. It flew through chaos as if it had never existed, only math, only timing. 7 1/3 seconds of nothing. Then a sound. Not loud, not cinematic, just a faint high ring. It carried like memory, thin, delayed, impossible. And in that fragile note the range froze. Every man, every soldier, every doubter stood rooted. The red rifle stayed still. Nora's breathing never changed. She didn't smile, she didn't celebrate, she just logged it. S3 impact left third. 7.3. Vent seam confirmed, 2 shear consistent. The colonel's clipboard fell silent against his chest. The Marine who'd filmed her earlier lowered his phone slowly, eyes wide. The camera was still recording, but his hands had forgotten what to do. A British corporal down the line whispered, "That's impossible." And then, as if the word itself needed proof, the sound echoed again, a second delayed note of steel, confirmation. The far plate, 3,800 meters away, shimmered faintly where sunlight caught the mark. Harlow, the SEAL instructor, blinked once slowly. Then his lips parted, not in shock but in recognition. He had seen that shot before, not here, not now, but in another country, another time. Different rifle, same rhythm. He whispered it to himself, "Count 7, always 7. The colonel moved forward, each step sinking into the sand like it was heavier than before. For the first time that day, he didn't smirk. He didn't joke. His sunglasses slid down his nose as he looked from the target to her. "You hit." His voice was soft, almost reverent. She didn't look up. "Logged, sir." He crouched slightly, eyes narrowing through the mirage. The faint silver dot on the steel plate gleamed back, a tiny scar in the sun. He exhaled long and low. "Well, I'll be damned." But even that came out wrong, like a confession instead of mockery. The range, once full of chatter and ego, now sounded like a church after prayer. A ranger removed his earpro without realizing it. The Brit who'd fired on her count earlier muttered, "Bloody magnificent." No one clapped, no one dared to break the spell. The Marine gunny who'd called her rifle a parade piece finally spoke, voice dry. "What in God's name did I just watch?" Harlow answered for her. "You just watched wind obey someone who listened long enough." The colonel turned his head, irritated but not ready to argue. "That poetic nonsense again, Chief." Harlow's eyes never left Nora. "No, sir, that's doctrine." She stayed prone, recording her data in tidy rows. Every stroke of the pencil was deliberate calm. Her world was still numbers and wind, not applause. When she finally rose to one knee, she brushed dust off her sleeve, revealing the tattoo again. Harlow stepped forward. "Staff Sergeant Blake," he said quietly. "Confirm Army Marksmanship Unit." Nora's hand froze mid-motion. She didn't answer. The colonel frowned. "She's supply chief, checked her file myself." "Checked what she's assigned as," Harlow said, "not what she's built from." He turned to her again, louder this time, his tone formal now, respectful in a way that made the air tighten. "This is Staff Sergeant Nora Blake, Army Marksmanship Unit, Ballistic Development Division. Some of you are using her data tables right now." The words landed like detonation without sound. Every head turned. The young private blinked, mouth half open. The Brit mouthed, "She wrote those cards." Even Roar's breath hitched before he hid it behind authority. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was sacred. Harlow continued, voice carrying. "She designed the cross-shear model used in sniper school rotations. Those laminated cards everyone studies, she built them." He paused, and you just watched her prove why they exist. The colonel's jaw flexed. His voice, when it came, was low and careful. "Is that true, Sergeant?" Nora closed her notebook, eyes steady. "Wind doesn't care about titles, sir," she said, "but data does." That was her only answer. And that was enough. It spread through the line like fire through dry grass, the realization, the weight. The woman they'd laughed at was the architect of their own doctrine. The red rifle was not decoration, it was a test. The gunny swallowed hard. "I guess we'll be needing that lecture on supply math, huh?" A few quiet laughs broke, Not mocking this time, human humble. Roar exhaled, shoulders sinking as if pride had finally run out of breath. "Staff Sergeant," he said quietly, "carry on." She nodded once. "Copy that, sir." No triumph, no gloating, just acknowledgement. Because the wind had already said everything that needed saying. The range slowly exhaled. The spell lifted, but the reverence stayed. Men reset their rifles. Instructors whispered to each other, recalculating what they thought they knew. The young private flipped through his notebook as if he'd missed half the alphabet. Harlow lingered beside her. "You know they'll talk about that shot for years," he said. "Only if they skip the math," she replied. He smiled. "That's the AMU way." She shook her head gently. "No, Chief, that's the patient way." She started packing her gear, neat and methodical. The bore snake slid through the barrel, one smooth motion, no ceremony, just respect. Her hands moved like she'd done it 1,000 times before, because she had. Behind her, the Brit lifted his hand in a small salute, barely visible. The kind of gesture soldiers reserve for moments that don't fit into words. She acknowledged it with the smallest nod, barely there, but it meant everything. As the sun dropped lower, the heat softened. Shadows grew long. The flags along the line found a rare agreement, all leaning in the same direction, as if even the wind had decided to listen. Roar stood under the shade canopy, hat in his hands now. His voice carried across the quiet range, different, no longer amused, no longer certain, but changed. "Staff Sergeant Blake," he said, "about that two-shot rule." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. She turned, red rifle slung over her shoulder. "Two was enough, sir." He nodded slowly. It was. He looked at her like a man, realizing he'd been grading the wrong test his whole life. The young private approached again, notebook clutched like a lifeline. "Ma'am," he said softly, "can I copy your notes?" She tore a clean page from the back, handed it to him. "Copy this instead," she said. At the top of the page she'd written, "Wind doesn't stay loyal. It changes friends every kilometer." The private frowned slightly, reading it. "What does that mean?" "You'll know," she said, "once you stop arguing with it." He nodded, not understanding, but knowing he would. The colonel lingered long after the others drifted off. The desert around them had turned gold, then copper, then the soft gray of surrender. He watched her pack the red rifle into its case. "I was wrong," he said quietly. She paused, then met his eyes. "Yes, sir." It wasn't disrespect. It was honesty, clean, without edge. He nodded. "Thank you for the reminder." "Of what?" He hesitated, looking downrange. "That sometimes rank makes you deaf." She said nothing, but her silence agreed. By evening, the sky over Fort Granite turned bruised and beautiful, streaked with orange and violet. The heat had finally given up, leaving behind a strange stillness. Nora stood at the end of the line, one last time. The steel plate far beyond still gleamed faintly in the fading light, one perfect mark catching the dying sun. She raised her eyes to it and exhaled, a slow, quiet sigh that sounded like peace. For a long moment she didn't move. The flags rustled, whispering across the desert floor, and for once every sound was soft. The colonel turned to Harlow. "You think she'll ever talk about that shot?" Harlow shook his head. "She doesn't have to." He looked at the plate, then back at the woman standing before it. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak," he said. "It just acts." Nora smiled faintly, almost hearing it, then walked off toward the trucks, quiet, small, steady. Behind her, the range stayed still a moment longer, as if listening to the echo of patience made perfect. The desert woke slow. Morning light spilled over Fort Granite like a tired apology, soft, pale gold that erased the bruises of yesterday's heat. Dust still lingered in the air, quiet and heavy, carrying the faint smell of burned powder and sun-cooked brass. Someone had swept the firing line before dawn. The footprints, the laughter, the mockery, all wiped clean. Only the faint indentation of Nora's mat remained, a small rectangle of pressed sand that looked almost like a memory refusing to fade. Colonel Roar arrived first. He stood where she had lain prone the day before, hands behind his back, hat under his arm. He looked downrange at the plate, still shining, still marked, and exhaled through his teeth. He hadn't slept much. Pride rarely lets men sleep after it breaks. A shadow crossed the sand behind him. "Morning, sir," Harlow said, voice rough with coffee and gravel. Roar nodded without turning. "Never thought I'd see it." Harlow looked out over the valley. "You mean the shot or the lesson?" Roar's jaw flexed. "Both." For a long moment they said nothing. The wind was cooler now, whispering instead of shouting. "She's setting up the classroom," Harlow said finally. Roar blinked. "Classroom." Harlow smiled faintly. "Your supply sergeant agreed to teach wind segmentation at 1500. Thought you signed off." The colonel sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I did. I just didn't expect everyone to actually show up." "They will," Harlow said. "Respect's contagious once it starts spreading." At 900 hours the shooters began to gather under the shade canopy. Same men, same boots, same desert, different posture. Where yesterday there had been swagger, now there was stillness. Even the Brit, sunburned and broad-shouldered, had found a seat in the front row. His notebook was already open, the page clean. The young private who'd copied her quote sat near the end of the table, pencil sharpened, jaw set like he was guarding scripture. And then she arrived. No announcement, no salute, just the soft shuffle of boots on sand and the quiet jingle of sling hardware. Nora Blake, sleeves rolled neat, cap pulled low, the red rifle absent now, replaced by a whiteboard marker tucked behind one ear and a small stack of laminated cards in her hand. "Morning," she said, voice level, not commanding, not deferential, just human. A few of the men murmured back. She gestured to the board. "We're going to talk about wind segmentation, shooter's wind, mid-range shear, target vent." 3 lines appeared under her marker, steady and precise. She drew them like she drew breath. "Yesterday," she said, "some of you saw wind as chaos. Mirage, flags, dust, all arguing. You tried to find the loudest voice and trust it." She set the marker down. "The wind doesn't have a loudest voice. It has layers." The Brit chuckled quietly. "Layers of lies, more like." Nora's eyes softened. "Only if you interrupt it before it finishes speaking." That earned a few smiles, the right kind this time. She moved along the board, writing again. "Mirage is your first language. Everything else is accent. Mirage tells you what the wind's thinking before it decides. It's the preview. Learn to read it, and you'll know when the flags are lying." The gunny raised a hand, sheepish. "Ma'am, what about when it boils straight up? Can't read a word of it." She nodded. "That's because it's yelling, step back, wait for it to whisper. Mirage always whispers before truth." Someone scribbled that down fast. Roar stood at the back of the tent, arms folded, watching his men lean forward like children at story time. He realized something strange. She wasn't lecturing. She was translating, turning the physics of chaos into a language they could finally hear. Harlow caught his expression. "Now you know why we kept her in development instead of PR," he murmured. Roar almost smiled. "She's doing both now." The heat rose, but the mood stayed cool. Questions came, curious, humble, even funny. "Ma'am, what's the count again?" 7, she said. "Always 7. If you can't breathe for 7 beats, you're not ready to pull the trigger." "Why 7?" "Because patience runs out at 6. Laughter rippled, gentle and clean. Then the private from yesterday raised his hand. "Sergeant, when you took that shot, what were you thinking?" She paused, the tent hushed. I wasn't, she said finally. Thinking gets in the way of listening. I was hearing what the wind wanted. The Brit grinned, and it wanted to be embarrassed, yeah. Even Nora smiled then, small and real, just corrected. The laughter came again, louder this time, but with respect folded inside it. After 2 hours, the board was filled with formulas and sketches, wind brackets, valley seams, microeddies. But in between the math, she'd drawn something simple, a dragonfly. Someone noticed. That your tattoo, ma'am? She glanced at it, then nodded. My father used to say the dragonfly sees in all directions, forward, backward, sideways. That's what you need to do with wind. See all of it, not just what's ahead. The room quieted again. The gunny cleared his throat. You get that ink before or after the ridge in Cunnar? Harlow shot him a look, but Nora answered anyway. After, she said, to remember who didn't come back. That landed heavy. No one spoke. Even the wind outside seemed to pause, pressing the tent walls inward for a breath. She didn't elaborate, she didn't need to. When the session ended, no one clapped. They stood slowly, some stretching, some thinking. The ranger who'd questioned her credentials yesterday stopped by the board and stared at the words "mirage" is your first language, as if trying to memorize their weight. The Brit approached her table, scratching his neck. You know, I've been chasing wind for 10 years. Feels like I just met it properly today. Nora capped the marker, sliding it into her pocket. It's polite once you listen. He laughed. Right, I'll have a pint for you when I'm home. Copy that, she said. Make it a quiet bar. He grinned. Don't know if those exist where I drink. When the tent cleared, Roar stayed behind. He waited until the others were out of earshot, then stepped forward, hat in hand. Staff Sergeant, he began, the words caught awkward. I wanted to thank you. For what, sir? For not throwing that shot in my face. She studied him for a moment, then said gently, if I did, the wind would change direction just to spite me. He chuckled, shaking his head. You're hell on a man's ego. She smiled faintly. So's gravity, sir. It reminds us we're not in charge. Roar nodded slowly, letting that sink in. You ever think about teaching full-time? Teaching, just listening out loud, she said. I'm already doing that. He extended his hand. For what it's worth, I'd be honored to serve under you on any range. She looked at his hand, then took it. Firm grip, no ceremony. Copy that, Colonel. Later, when the camp thinned out, Nora sat alone near the edge of the range. The sun was setting again, orange bleeding into violet. She had her notebook open on her knee, the pages fluttering in the wind. She wasn't writing data now. Just lines, thoughts, quiet things meant for no one else. Her father's voice came back, distant, wrapped in memory. Metal remembers mistakes, kid. Patience remembers victories. She smiled. You were right, Dad. Just took the world a few years to catch up. Harlow approached from behind, carrying 2 tin cups. He handed her one. Coffee, stronger than wisdom, weaker than pride. She accepted it with a small nod. Thanks. He lowered himself beside her, groaning like old joints do. You know, he said after a while, I've seen a lot of shooters chase respect. You're the first I've seen earn silence instead. Silence lasts longer, she said. He looked at her profile, the calm eyes, the set jaw. You really don't care that the internet'll call you a legend after this? She shrugged. Legends don't shoot groups, people do. He chuckled. Fair point. They sat that way for a while, 2 soldiers, 2 cups, one quiet desert. The wind moved through the grass, carrying no judgment this time, only peace. When night fell, the range lights flickered on one by one, throwing long shadows across the sand. The red rifle lay disassembled beside her pack, cleaned and oiled. The young private appeared again, hesitant. Ma'am. Yeah. I copied that page you gave me. Wind changes friends every kilometer. I think I get it now. She tilted her head. You do. He nodded, smiling shyly. Means people do too, so don't take it personal. Nora smiled, close enough. He turned to leave, then stopped. You're staying another day. One more, she said. Teaching again tomorrow, advanced group. Can I sit in? She looked at him. You already are. He grinned and jogged off, dust lifting around his boots. When she was alone again, Nora closed her notebook, resting her palm on the cover. The desert around her was all shadow and whisper, stars beginning to bloom overhead. Far downrange, the 3,800-meter plate still caught a sliver of light from a lantern someone had left burning, just enough to mark it, a single silver eye in the darkness. She whispered to it, almost inaudible, still listening. The wind brushed her sleeve in answer. And for the first time in a long time, she felt something rare, peace not earned through victory, but through understanding. Because respect wasn't about being right. It was about staying still long enough for truth to reveal itself. The colonel had learned that. The range had learned that. And somewhere deep inside, so had she. Her father's voice came again, softer now, fading into the night. Metal remembers mistakes. Nora added her own echo under her breath. And wind forgives them. The stars above flickered like tiny tracer rounds across an endless sky, and the desert finally slept. Tomorrow the flags would argue again. Tomorrow new shooters would doubt again. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Nora Blake would still be there, patient, listening, red rifle steady against her shoulder, reading the language everyone else was too loud to hear. The wind arrived before dawn. It didn't whisper this time, it warned. By the time first light brushed over Fort Granite, the range flags were already arguing again, snapping left, twitching right, their conversations louder than any human voice. The sky had that strange copper tint soldiers recognize instinctively, the color before trouble. Harlow stood near the tents, coffee in hand, watching the clouds crawl low over the horizon. Storm's coming, he muttered. Roar joined him, hat pulled down tight. Figures, the day she plans her advanced demo. Maybe that's the lesson, Harlow said. The colonel squinted toward the firing line where Nora was already setting up, red rifle in its case beside her, hair tucked under her cap, sleeves rolled neat, movements steady as ritual. While everyone else scanned the sky, she studied the ground, the grass, the sand, the flags at half-mast angles, listening. The colonel sighed. I swear she treats wind like a person. Harlow smiled. That's because it is to her. By 900 hours, 20 soldiers stood on the range. The same faces as yesterday, plus a few new ones who'd heard rumors. The Brit was back, front row again, notebook ready. The young private sat cross-legged on the ground near her mat, his pencil already tapping in rhythm. Even the Marine gunny was there, chewing gum slow, saying nothing. Nora looked at them, then at the horizon. The wind picked up, tossing sand against boots. Anybody ever shoot through a dust storm? She asked. A few nodded. The Brit muttered, tried, missed everything but my pride. Good, she said. Today's not for comfort, it's for honesty. She crouched beside her mat, flipping open her green notebook. The same one from yesterday, its edges curled, its pages marked with years of tiny wind codes. This is what the world looks like when the math stops behaving, she said. When gusts contradict, flags lie, mirage boils, that's when shooters panic. She looked up. Today you don't chase the target, you listen to the storm. A rumble echoed far away, thunder rolling over the horizon like a warning drum. Storm'll cross mid-range in 20 minutes, Harlow called from behind the canopy. Nora nodded, perfect timing. She picked up a small flag on a wooden stake and drove it into the dirt beside her. The cloth snapped violently, caught between directions. Lesson 1, she said, pointing. That flag's not wrong, it's just incomplete. It's telling the truth about this 10 feet of air, not about the next 1,000. The gunny folded his arms. So how do you shoot through that? She met his eyes. You don't shoot through it, you shoot with it. The Brit grinned. You make it sound like a dance. She smirked back. It is, you just have to let the wind lead. The first wave of dust came like smoke, thin at first, then thicker, curling across the range in yellow ribbons. Mirage vanished. The far ridge blurred into a dull gray line. Someone coughed. Another muttered, "We're not seeing anything in that." Nora's voice cut through calmly. Visibility isn't eyesight, it's awareness. Mirage hides truth, storms force you to feel it. She motioned for the Brit to set up at lane 3. 2 shots, no electronics, no kestrel, just your gut and what you've learned. He lay prone, adjusting his cheek weld, squinting into brown haze. Wind's everywhere, he muttered. Don't even know what it's saying. That's the point, she said. Don't listen for words, listen for rhythm. He blinked, confused. Rhythm. She crouched beside him, pointing toward the dust. Watch the grass. See how it leans left, then holds before swinging back. That pause is the count. That's your window. That's your 7. He breathed, waiting, counted softly. 1, 2, 3. On 7, he pressed the trigger. The shot vanished into storm, but somewhere out in the haze, faint and delayed, came a single muted clang. He froze, then exhaled a laugh of disbelief. Bloody hell, first try. Nora smiled, small and proud. Now do it again before you forget why it worked. Next up was the gunny. He went prone with practiced swagger, but his eyes were serious this time. Wind's moving like a drunk, he said. Then match its steps, Nora replied. Don't fight it. Adjust between gusts, not during. You break on its apology, not its tantrum. He snorted but did as told. First shot went wide, dust puff far right. He frowned. Nora leaned down. You broke at 5. 5 what? 5 beats, you rushed it. He reset, waited longer, this time counting silently with her rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Shot cracked. 7 seconds later, faint impact. He lowered the rifle slowly, blinking into the storm. Guess it apologized. She chuckled, told you it would. Harlow, watching from behind, murmured to Roar. She's teaching patience disguised as math. Roar nodded, patience disguised as leadership. The storm thickened. Dust rolled like fog, biting the throat. The sun dimmed, turned pale white behind clouds. Pack it in, an instructor called. Nora shook her head, not yet. She stood in the wind, sleeve flapping, notebook pages whipping against her wrist. You can't teach stillness when the air's quiet. You teach it when the world's trying to make you rush. The men listened. Even through grit and wind, her voice cut clean, calm, unbothered. Every mission, every range, every choice, you'll face noise. Wind, doubt, people, all noise. The question isn't if it stops, it's if you do. The young private nodded slowly, stopped to listen. Exactly, she said. Listening is your weapon. Thunder cracked again, closer now, sharp and bright. Dust twisted into spirals. Roar moved forward. Blake, it's not safe out here. She turned, her face streaked with sand but steady. Neither was Cunnar, sir, but the math didn't care there either. He froze, recognizing the truth in it. She crouched again, adjusting her rifle, not to fire but to demonstrate. Wind segmentation doesn't stop working just because we're scared, she said. It stops when we stop trusting it. Harlow's jaw tightened. You teaching shooting or life? Same thing, she said softly. A gust tore through then, hard enough to knock sandbags sideways. Everyone instinctively shielded their faces, crouching low. Everyone except Nora. She stood, hands loose, hair whipping out from under her cap, eyes half closed. For a moment, she looked like she belonged to the storm. Then slowly, she raised her hand and traced the air in front of her, as if writing something only she could see. When the wind softened, she turned to the class. Count 7, she said. The private beside her obeyed. 1, 2. Not out loud, she corrected gently. Count in your chest, let your pulse talk. He nodded, pressed his hand to his vest, breathing deep. 7 beats later, the air shifted again, just as she'd predicted. The storm eased, not gone, but organized. The chaos had shape now. She smiled. Now you can shoot again. When it was over, when the sky finally cleared and the flags went limp, no one wanted to move. The desert looked different again, washed clean, pale, and quiet. The soldiers were covered in dust, eyes red, clothes filthy, but their notebooks were full. Nora sat cross-legged on the mat, wiping grit off her pages, humming softly under her breath. The Brit approached first. You're mad, you know that. She looked up, probably. He laughed. But you just taught me more in a storm than I learned in 10 calm years. Storms are honest, she said. They don't let you fake calm. The gunny extended a hand, something like respect in his eyes. Next time I see supply on a range, I'll shut my mouth first. She shook his hand. Do that, and the wind might treat you kinder. The private came last, shy again. Ma'am, that storm, it felt alive. She nodded. It is. Everything alive teaches if you're quiet enough. He grinned. Guess that means you're part wind, huh? She chuckled low. On bad days. When the last soldier left, the colonel stayed behind. He watched her pack her gear, brushing dust off the red rifle's finish. You know, he said finally, yesterday I thought you embarrassed me. She paused, and today? Today, I think you rescued me from my own noise. She zipped the case shut. Storms do that. He smiled, half tired, half grateful. So do people like you. She met his gaze. Only when the room's ready to listen, sir. He nodded slowly. It is now. That evening, as the camp lights came on and the storm faded to memory, Nora sat by the perimeter fence, her notebook open on her knees again. She wrote in tidy lines. Storm session. Mid-range, visibility 0. Students 20. Impact rate 80%. Morale steady. Lesson learned. Silence wins arguments, wind can't. She closed the notebook, resting her palm on the cover like a prayer. Behind her, Harlow's voice floated through the twilight. You ever going to publish that book of yours? She smiled. Not mine to publish, belongs to the wind. He chuckled. You're something else, Blake. She looked back toward the range, where the plate at 3,800 still gleamed faintly, dust streaking its surface like fingerprints. I'm just proof, she said, that quiet people don't disappear, they accumulate. The wind moved again, gentler now, grateful. And somewhere far away, thunder echoed one last time, not as warning but as applause. The storm had left the desert quiet. Too quiet, like the world was holding its breath. Night fell over Fort Granite in thin layers of silver light. The sky above was a scatter of stars so sharp they looked like bullet holes in a black sheet. Down rain. The steel plates caught the glow of lanterns, faint ghosts of sunlight long gone. Nora sat alone on the hood of a Humvee, boots resting on the bumper, coffee tin cupped between her palms. The range was empty. The only sound was wind scraping through the wire fence. Harlow found her there, as he always did after dusk, half mentor, half friend, both insomniac. He handed her another cup. You're still awake. So are you, she said without looking up. He sat beside her, joints creaking like old gears. Storm broke clean. You broke half these boys' egos with it. She smiled faintly. Egos heal fast. Not after yesterday. He took a slow sip. You know, people are curious. About what? About where you learned to read wind like that. She was quiet a long time. The kind of quiet that doesn't mean she's ignoring you. It means she's walking through a memory, step by step, barefoot. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed. lower, softer, like the desert itself was listening. "Cunnar Ridge," she said. Harlow turned his head. "I figured." She nodded once, eyes still fixed on the dark horizon. The memory came like a film reel, unspooling in the dark, grainy, dusty, heavy with sound. Afghanistan, 2013, Kunar Province. The air was thinner there, sharp, mountain air that cut through the lungs and filled every silence with echoes. The valley below the ridge was a labyrinth of rock and dust and the hum of distant prayer. Nora had been 26, 1 year into AMU field rotation, attached to a small advisory team. Their mission: extract a local medic trapped in a clinic after an ambush, 30 civilians pinned inside, crossfire from 3 ridgelines. No comms, no air support, just math, rifles, and breath. She could still smell it, the copper and diesel, still hear the radio static whispering like a dying fire. "We need cover across the clinic road. Can you see the door?" Her spotter, Cruz, had been beside her, broad-shouldered, always chewing sunflower seeds like it was a ritual. "Got it," she'd said. "Range 2,400 meters, wind. Hell, it's playing poker." Cruz smirked. "You always say that before you solve it." She'd adjusted the scope, listening to the wind the way some people listen to prayer, patient, reverent, uncertain. The first shot broke clean, the second corrected. Then they started moving civilians in twos, covered by her fire. For 43 minutes, she'd been the wall between life and chaos. Until the wind changed. Not a big shift, just a flicker, an eddy curling off the far ridge that she didn't feel soon enough. The next round missed by inches, and in that inch, Cruz leaned up to adjust comms. The bullet meant for someone else found him instead. He didn't shout. He just exhaled once and fell sideways, seeds scattering over the rock. She kept shooting, not because of orders, because stopping would mean collapsing. When the evac finally came, she walked down the ridge alone, rifle on her shoulder. No one saw her cry, no one asked. They named the extraction Operation Quiet Gate. And in every report, every after-action note, one line repeated: unknown sniper provided overwatch, no civilian casualties. The unknown was her, classified, buried, sealed behind a wall of data and silence. Back on the hood of the Humvee, Harlow watched her eyes while she spoke, not crying, but remembering like it still burned under her ribs. "Cruz," she said softly. "He used to say the wind's like a mirror. You can see yourself in it if you look long enough." She traced a circle on the coffee lid with her thumb. "I looked too long that day, saw everything I hated." Harlow swallowed, voice rough. "That's why you got out of field work." She nodded, "And why I stopped talking so much." He nodded too, slow, respectful. "And the dragonfly?" Cruz found one the morning of the mission, said it landed on his scope. He laughed, called it a good omen. She looked up at the stars. "When I inked it later, I didn't believe in omens anymore. I just needed to remember what flying looked like." Harlow sat in silence for a while, then asked quietly, "You ever forgive yourself for that miss?" Her jaw tightened. "Forgive, no." She looked downrange. "But I learned to aim differently." He frowned, meaning I don't shoot for glory anymore. I shoot for stillness." He nodded, eyes on the desert. "You turned guilt into patience." She exhaled slowly, better than turning it into noise. The sound of distant laughter drifted from the barracks, young soldiers telling stories, proud, alive, unaware of how fragile that is. Nora smiled faintly. "They remind me of us before the quiet." "Yeah," Harlow said, "before the math mattered more than the names." He glanced sideways. "You ever write him his family?" "I did," she said, "every year on the date, never mailed it." "Why not?" "Because words aren't bullets. They don't hit where you need them to." Harlow didn't answer. He just let the silence stretch. Because silence, for people like them, was sacred. Later, she walked down to the range one last time before lights out. The night air was cooler, the sand hard under her boots. She carried no weapon, just the green notebook and a small brass casing from her kit. She knelt where the mat had been, pressed the casing into the dirt, and whispered, "For you, Cruz, for every breath I waited before pulling the trigger." The wind stirred, soft, almost human, and lifted a small spiral of sand across the mat's outline. She smiled, still arguing, huh? The desert didn't answer, but it didn't have to. It had learned her language long ago. When she returned to camp, Roar was waiting under the canopy, paperwork forgotten on his lap. He looked up. "Chief said you might not sleep much." "Chief's observant." He gestured to the empty chair beside him. "Sit a minute." She hesitated, then sat. "I looked up your record," he said, "or tried to. Most of it's redacted." She didn't reply. "I figured as much," he said, "but I saw one line that stuck out." He unfolded a small paper, reading softly. "Demonstrated exceptional composure under dynamic wind conditions." He looked at her. "That's the understatement of the decade." She smiled faintly. "Military likes tidy sentences for messy things." He leaned forward, elbows on knees. "I don't think what you did was tidy, Blake. I think it was necessary." She tilted her head. "And the part where I missed?" Roar met her gaze steady. "That's the part that made you real." She blinked once slowly, then looked away. "You're learning." He grinned. "Storms teach faster than I do." An hour later, Harlow passed by the barracks. Through the open window, he heard Nora's voice, not talking, just humming quietly. A melody with no words. Soft, haunting, familiar. He froze, remembering. Cruz had hummed the same tune over comms that day in Cunnar. A folk song from home, about rain and patience and return. Harlow stood there a while, eyes closed. Sometimes healing doesn't sound like victory. It sounds like someone remembering without breaking. Near midnight, Nora finally lay down, notebook on her chest. She wrote one last line before sleep took her. "Wind forgives, people forget, but math remembers forever." Her eyes closed, and for the first time in years, her dream wasn't of gunfire or sand. It was of a dragonfly, wings steady, gliding through clear air over quiet water, untouched by wind, alive in silence. The next morning would bring orders. Reassignments. A new mission she hadn't asked for but couldn't refuse. But tonight the desert was still. And in that stillness, the wind carried one whisper across the sleeping range. Not of guilt, not of loss, but of peace hard-earned. Sometimes patience is the loudest form of courage. The order came with the sunrise. A single envelope, hand-delivered to her bunk by a runner who didn't know what he was carrying. No salutes, no small talk, just "For you, ma'am." The paper smelled faintly of ink and dust, freshly printed, hurried. Nora unfolded it, eyes scanning the lines like a sniper reading terrain. One word caught her first: observation. Then the coordinates. And below them, non-engagement directive unless provoked. It was the kind of order written by people who'd never listened to wind or guilt. Too clean, too confident. She read it twice more, then exhaled. Same valley, same rules that had cost her before. Outside, the camp was waking. Boots thudded, radios cracked, laughter carried through the dry morning. Harlow found her standing by the door, envelope in one hand, coffee in the other. "You got the call?" She nodded. He took it from her fingers, reading quickly. "Cunnar Ridge coordinates," he muttered. "You're kidding." "Different mission," she said. "Same ghosts." He looked up sharply. "You don't have to say yes." She gave a small smile. "You ever know me to say no to a storm?" He sighed. "There are storms, and then there's walking back into the one that made you." She turned toward the range, eyes narrowing against the light. "Maybe it's time I listen to what it's trying to tell me. By noon, the small team was assembled. 6 shooters, 2 spotters, 1 transport pilot waiting by the helipad with rotors ticking like a slow heartbeat. Colonel Rohr briefed them under the canopy. Intel picked up movement near the southern ridge, possible insurgent test site. Eyes only, no engagement. Blake, your lead observer. Harlow's your safety. Nora stood silent, hands clasped behind her back. Rohr hesitated. You sure you're okay with this, Staff Sergeant? I'm fine, sir. Harlow glanced at her. Fine was military for I'll carry it later. Rohr gave a curt nod. We lift in 20. The helicopter sliced through the afternoon heat, climbing into a sky that felt too familiar. Nora sat by the window, headset pressed to one ear, watching the earth blur below. Dry rivers, bone-white ridges, memories stitched to every contour. Harlow leaned across. You know the irony, right? 10 years later, you're back to observe the same coordinates. Maybe they never stopped observing me, she said quietly. He smiled, half sad. You always did make the job sound poetic. Poetry's just math that learned manners. He laughed once. The sound got swallowed by the rotor wash. They set down on a high ridge at 1500 hours. The valley stretched below like a wound that never healed, quiet, dusty, indifferent. The forward observation post was nothing more than rocks and canvas. Old bullet scars still marked the cliffs. The wind here was different, older, wiser. Nora crouched, setting up her scope, the red rifle beside it like a memory made metal. Through the glass she saw the ruins of the old clinic. Roof collapsed, walls crumbling. A single tree still stood outside it, branches twisted by years of wind. Harlow settled beside her. You all right? She nodded once, feels smaller now. That's time for you. Maybe it's forgiveness. He looked at her, then away. Or maybe just distance pretending to be peace. She didn't answer. She adjusted the scope instead, focusing on a faint shimmer of movement near the old road. Got eyes, she said. 2, maybe 3 figures, non-uniform, tools, not rifles. Civilians. Could be scavengers. Rohr's voice crackled over comms from the command truck. Eyes open, Blake. Confirm pattern before calling it. Copy. She watched them longer, 2 men, one young, one older, both moving slowly, carrying metal scraps from the ruins. Not fighters, survivors. Her chest tightened. They were walking through the same ground crews had died to protect. Harlow whispered, orders say no engagement. I know. But orders also said observe, and observation meant seeing what others ignored. She zoomed the scope, catching a flicker of light, something small in the boy's hands. Not a weapon, a piece of glass, reflecting sunlight into the hills like a signal. Wait, she said softly, that's not random. Rohr again, report Blake. She hesitated. If she called it a signal, they'd bring drones. If she didn't and it was, people might die. Harlow watched her, sensing the battle behind her eyes. You're hearing wind again, aren't you? Yeah. What's it saying? That we're not the target this time. Rohr's voice sharpened. Blake, I need confirmation. She took a long breath, listening. The flags on their post leaned south, not east. The mirage bent wrong. The sound of air through the rocks changed pitch, lower, faster, directed. Oh God, she murmured. The valley's funneling wind. Someone's setting charges. Air displacement means heat. Translation, Harlow asked. Means they're about to blow the ridge we're standing on. Say again. Sir, she said into the radio, this isn't observation, it's bait. They're drawing us in to collapse the shelf. Rohr cursed, confirm. The first blast answered him. A thunderclap ripped through the valley, dust exploding upward like a second storm. The ground lurched. Rock screamed against rock. Down, Harlow shouted. grabbing her vest and pulling her behind cover as a shockwave rolled through the ridge, hurling debris past them. The radio died in static. For a long, endless moment, there was only the sound of falling stone and her heartbeat counting on its own. 1, 2, 3. She opened her eyes. Harlow's face was streaked with dirt, blood on his temple, but conscious. "You good?" "Yeah." Below, the valley was chaos, smoke and dust, and through it, people running. The two civilians she'd seen were dragging a third figure from the rubble. She raised her scope, heart pounding. The figure wasn't one of theirs, it was a child. Roar's voice came back, broken through interference. "Blake's status." "Alive," she said. "Minimal damage, but sir, there are civilians down there. We need medevac." "Negative," he said instantly. "Our priorities regroup and extraction. We can't risk another collapse." She froze. "Sir, they're right below us." "I said negative. That's an order." She lowered the radio slowly, jaw tightening. Harlow saw it in her eyes, the same look she'd had before Cunnar went silent. "Nora," he said softly, "don't." She stood, slinging her rifle. "I already did once." "Blake, listen." "Orders are wind, Chief," she said quietly. They changed direction. Then she started down the ridge. The descent was brutal, loose rock, dust still falling like rain. She moved fast, using both hands, ignoring the sting of cuts. The closer she got, the clearer the screams became. One voice calling, one coughing, one silent. She reached them under a collapsed wall, two men pinned under debris, the child wedged between. "Hold still," she shouted. "I've got you." They looked up, terrified, not understanding her words but reading her intent. She dropped her pack, wedged her shoulder under the slab and pushed. Pain ripped through her arm. She kept pushing. Finally the rock shifted. The boy slid free, gasping. She caught him, checked his pulse, then turned to the older man still trapped. He was pointing at something, toward the far ridge. Through the smoke, she saw them. A small group of armed men setting detonators for a second blast. Her breath hitched. "They're gonna drop the rest of the valley." Harlow's voice on comms. "Blake, what are you doing?" "Saving what's left." She raised the red rifle, dropped prone, and sighted through dust and chaos. Mirage useless, wind unreadable. Only instinct now, instinct built from years of listening. She exhaled once. The shot cracked, vanished. 5 seconds, 6. One of the figures fell. Another scrambled, detonator clattering away. The explosion didn't come. Silence did. When the dust finally settled, Harlow found her sitting on the ground beside the civilians, hands shaking. The boy clung to her sleeve. "You're bleeding," he said. She looked at her arm, shrugged. "So's the mountain." Roar's voice came back, ragged, angry, relieved. "Blake, you disobeyed a direct." She cut him off. "I followed a better one." "Whose?" "The wind." Hours later, back at base, the debrief room was cold. Roar stood behind the table, silent for a long time before speaking. "You saved 3 lives," he said finally, "and risked 6. She looked him in the eye, "and lost none." He sighed. "You know I have to write it up." "Then write it honestly." He nodded. "I will." She turned to leave, but he stopped her. "Blake, when you went down that ridge, what made you so sure you were right?" She paused at the door. "I wasn't sure," she said. "I was just done being afraid of mistakes." Then she walked out. Later, Harlow found her by the perimeter again. Same coffee tin, same wind. "Colonel's not thrilled," he said. "He'll live. You broke chain of command." "I didn't break it. I bent it to save something worth more." He studied her face. "You ever think about quitting?" "Every day," she said. "And every day the wind talks me out of it." He smiled, shaking his head. "You're impossible." "Maybe." She took a sip, looking at the stars. "But impossible saved a few people today." The wind moved again, softer now, forgiving. In the distance, the clinic ruins glowed faintly under moonlight. The same place she once lost someone, the same place she just saved someone else. Maybe that's what forgiveness looked like. Not words, not apologies, just symmetry. Harlow followed her gaze. You know what that looks like to me. What? Closure. She smiled faintly. Wind doesn't close, it circles back. He chuckled. Then I guess you're not done yet. She looked toward the horizon. Not yet. The night fell quiet again. Only the hum of power lines and the steady rhythm of her heartbeat counting 7 in the dark. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And somewhere beyond, in the still air of the valley, the world finally listened. The wind woke early that morning. It slipped through the base like it had something to say, brushing across the flags, whispering through the cracks in the hangar doors, tugging gently at the corners of the red rifle case that sat by Nora Blake's bunk. Her eyes opened before the alarm. Habit, discipline, a heart that still counted before dawn. The desert outside was washed clean after yesterday's storm, the kind of stillness that almost felt respectful, like the land itself knew what she'd done. She sat up slowly, tying her hair back, her motions unhurried. Today wasn't for battle, today was for closure. Across the compound, voices were low. The younger soldiers from the course were breaking down range equipment, joking softly. The Brit was teaching the private a new card trick. The gunny was sweeping brass like it was church floor. And above it all, the flags flapped in rhythm, calm, steady, almost musical. The storm had left its mark, but it had also left its lesson. Nora smiled faintly. Storms are honest. At 800, the colonel called her to the operations room. No formality this time, no tension, just 2 soldiers who had finally learned how to speak to each other. He gestured for her to sit. She didn't. Relax, he said, half smiling. This isn't a tribunal. Didn't figure it was, sir. He looked at her, not through her, not above her, but at her. You broke an order, he said plainly. Yes, sir. And saved lives. Yes, sir. He leaned back, studying her. I read your old file last night, the part that wasn't redacted. She raised an eyebrow. Find anything interesting? Yeah, he said. I found the word disciplinary once, and the word exceptional about 30 times. She didn't respond. He continued, quieter now. What happened on that ridge 10 years ago? You've been carrying it longer than the military has. She looked down. Some debts don't fit in reports. Roar nodded slowly. Then maybe it's time you stopped paying. She looked up at him, uncertain whether it was forgiveness or dismissal. He smiled faintly. Command offering you a rotation at Fort Benning. Instructor billet, permanent. She blinked. Instructor. Your lesson plans already spread through half the sniper schools after that storm demo, he said. They want you to teach it officially. Wind discipline and ballistic patience. She laughed softly. That's a terrible title. Then fix it. Silence stretched between them. She studied his face, the same man who once smirked at her red rifle, now offering her a chair instead of a challenge. Sir, she said finally, you sure about this? He smiled. Sometimes when a soldier listens long enough, even the wind changes its mind. She nodded slowly. Then I'll go. Roar extended his hand. You earned this, Staff Sergeant. She shook it firm, brief. No, sir, I learned it. He chuckled. Same thing, isn't it? She smiled faintly. Not always. That afternoon, she walked the range one last time. The red rifle case swung from her shoulder. The sand was soft under her boots, marked with hundreds of boot prints, all leading in different directions, all part of the same circle. Downrange, the steel plates glinted faintly. The far one, 3,800 meters, still wore its scar from that impossible shot. No one had painted over it. Some marks deserved to stay. She stopped halfway down the line, setting the rifle case on the ground. For a moment, she just looked at it, the tool that had carried her pain, her purpose, her redemption. Then she opened it. The rifle gleamed like it was breathing sunlight. Red finish dulled with dust, edges worn where hands had held it steady through storms, through years, through guilt. She ran her palm along the stock, tracing every scratch, every story. And then she whispered, "We did good." Her voice barely carried over the wind, but the range heard it. The air always does. She shouldered the rifle one last time, not to shoot, just to feel it, the weight, the balance, the quiet. A voice behind her, "Ma'am." She turned. The young private stood there, notebook in hand, looking both proud and lost. "You're really leaving?" "Orders," she said gently. "Even the wind follows some." He hesitated. "Who's gonna teach us now?" She smiled. "You are. Every time you wait one breath longer before pulling the trigger, you're teaching someone." He nodded, eyes bright. "You ever coming back?" She looked toward the horizon. "Wind circles back, so maybe." He handed her something then, a small square of paper, torn from his notebook. "I copied this from your board," he said shyly. She unfolded it. Her own handwriting stared back at her, the quote she'd written on the last day of class. "Mirage is your first language. Everything else is accent." She smiled. "Keep it. You'll need it more than I will." He shook his head. "Already memorized." She folded the paper, slipped it into her pocket, and rested a hand briefly on his shoulder. "Then listen carefully." He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." And then he walked away, back toward the tents, back toward tomorrow. The sun began to fall, stretching the world into long shadows. Harlow appeared over the ridge, carrying 2 tin cups again. Always 2. "Bennying, huh?" he said. "Apparently. You'll hate the humidity." "Probably." He grinned. "They'll love you anyway." She took the cup, sipped, and looked out over the valley. "I used to think the range was punishment. And now I think it's a conversation. You just have to shut up long enough to hear the other side." He nodded, eyes soft. "You ever gonna write all this down?" She smirked. "Already did." He raised an eyebrow. "That notebook?" She shook her head. "No, every student I've taught, every win they've learned to read, that's the record." He chuckled quietly. "You're a strange one, Blake." "Good," she said. "Normal people make too much noise." Evening deepened. The flag slowed to stillness. The light shifted from gold to amber to violet, that same bruised color that seemed to follow her everywhere. Nora opened her notebook one last time and wrote, "Departure Fort Granite. Range complete. Students ready. Wind steady. Lesson remains." She closed it, tying the leather strap around it. Then quietly, she unscrewed a single round from her pouch, not live, just casing and bullet pressed together. She placed it on the firing line where her mat used to be, the brass catching the last bit of light. Harlow watched, puzzled. "What's that for?" "Closure," she said softly. He smiled. "I thought you said wind doesn't close." "It doesn't," she replied, "but people need symbols." As night came, the base lights flickered on one by one. The air cooled. Somewhere a radio played an old song one cruise used to hum. Nora looked up at the sky. The stars were clearer tonight, like the world was finally finished arguing. She whispered to herself, "Still listening." The wind brushed her cheek in answer. She smiled. "Good." Hours later, long after everyone had gone to bed, the sound of a truck engine echoed softly through the compound. She loaded her duffel, the red rifle case on top. Harlow stood by the gate, hands in his pockets. "You sure you don't want to say goodbye to the others?" "They'll figure it out when they stop hearing me correct their breathing." He laughed fair. He hesitated, then asked, "What are you gonna tell them at Bennying, about the shot, about the storm?" She looked out the window, nothing. He frowned, nothing. She met his eyes, calm and certain. Some stories aren't meant to be told, they're meant to be remembered quietly. He nodded slowly. Then what'll you tell them instead? She smiled faintly. That dignity doesn't speak. He tilted his head, and she closed the door, eyes soft, voice barely above a whisper. It simply acts. The truck rolled forward, tires crunching over gravel. The gate swung open. The desert waited, vast, familiar, forgiving. The flags behind her fluttered once more, one final salute from the wind. And just like that, she was gone. Long after the dust settled, the base returned to routine. New shooters came, new storms passed, the range aged like all things built from silence. But down at Lane 7, her lane instructors began to notice something strange. On still days, when the air was quiet and the sun cut sharp across the sand, the wind there would shift ever so slightly, not east, not west, just enough to carry a faint echo downrange. A single soft note, like a breath. Like someone counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And if you listened closely, you could almost hear it whispering through the mirage. Not warning, not command, but memory. A voice calm and patient as the desert itself. Wind forgives, silence teaches, patience wins. And for the few who stood still long enough to hear it, that was enough. Because the red rifle might have left the range. But Nora Blake never really did.